Can you give me a wave if this is the first time you're really engaging with the idea of the voter registration champions? Okay, Andrew, Stephen, Karen. So, okay, so for most of you, this is fairly new. That's great. So we're going to take you through what does it mean to be a voter registration champion? Why are we setting up this scheme? How does it work? We're going to have a bit of time for you in kind of one-to-one breakouts to think about why and how this can be relevant to you and your organizations. And then we're going to run through what is the process by which organizations can get accredited as voter registration champions. And I think maybe I'll just start there. Presumably, most of you are aware of Citizens UK and community organising, and most of you are aware of the Living Wage Foundation scheme, accreditation scheme. What we're trying to do here is to combine the best of both of those things in a way that is accessible to anybody in an organisation up and down the country. So if you came to this training thinking, I'm going to learn how to be a voter registration champion as an individual, you're perhaps going to be a little bit disappointed because in our terminology, this scheme is about organisations, getting organisations accredited as voter registration champions so that we can at scale tackle the crisis that looms before us of people essentially being disenfranchised because they're eligible to vote, but they're either not registered, they don't know or don't have or forget to take photo ID to the polling station with them when they vote, or just because they don't see the value of voting in the first place and can't be bothered to turn up. That's really what the voter registration champion scheme is trying to do, is mobilize a big coalition, big movement of organizations, civil society organizations, some employers as well, around the country to get their people election ready for the election that will happen this year. So that's what this is about. And Jenny, I wonder whether you could get us the first slide up, please. Some of you may have seen this. This is on the on our website, Voter Registration Champions website, so you can get access to this information there. But Jenny, here we go. Great. So this is the guide for schools and colleges. We've got different PowerPoint slide decks on the website for different types of organizations. There's one there that's pitched at employers. There's one that's pitched at schools and colleges. There's one that's pitched at higher education institutions. And there's one that's pitched at faith and civil society organizations. So we're going to use the one that speaks to schools and colleges, but much of this is going to be very similar to the information is largely the same. It's the case studies that are slightly different in each case. So top line, I think you all know it's going to be a general election by January 2025. The Electoral Commission estimates that 8 million eligible voters will miss out because they're not properly registered. 8 million. It's a massive chunk of people who they think may miss out. Next slide, please, Jenny. So here's just a bit of detail from the research from the Electoral Commission. This is from their 23 report into electoral registers in the UK. So 8 million people may not vote because they didn't register in time. 4 million eligible voters may not vote because they don't have the appropriate photo ID, which is the new rule that's come in. 14 million eligible voters may not vote just because they're not motivated to turn out on election day. And what do we know about who ends up being disenfranchised through these various different dynamics? Well, particularly badly affected are the young, those that are non-UK nationals, people who rent, people who have moved recently, people who live in economically disadvantaged communities, and people who are from ethnic minorities. So those are all groups that Citizens has kind of deep roots and connections to, and just looking at the people on the call, the same is true, I think, of your organizations too. So we know that through community organising, we can register tens of thousands of people to vote. We've done it many times in many, many different types of election. If you go to the next slide, please, Jen. We've got over a decade's experience of doing this, of training people at local level through their institutions, particularly to focus on registering people who might be less likely to register to vote otherwise or to fall off electoral register. electoral registers. So again, those young people, migrant communities, those in diverse and economically disadvantaged inner city areas. And also just worth noting that voter registration links very clearly to Citizens' three strategic aims about developing leaders, because we can train people to register others to vote, about strengthening institutions, because we focus our voter registration campaigns around civil society organizations. And thirdly, it links to our desire to want to make change, because we register tens of thousands of people to vote in this way. Next slide, please, Jenny. But we've also shown that we can accredit tens of thousands of organizations as living wage employers. So this is the Living Wage Foundation element of it. Next slide, please, Jenny. And I won't spend huge amounts of time doing it here, but it is a different theory of change. So for those of you who've been involved in the Living Wage campaign for a long time, you'll know that it started in telco in very much a community organizing model and achieved great success there. But the real growth to the 14,000 or so employers that are now accredited has come about through adding to the community organizing theory of change, a voluntary regulation theory of change. The idea that if you offer organizations a badge to say, we're doing a good thing, you will get organizations opting in that you'll probably never get around to targeting through a community organizing approach, which is more resource intensive, people intensive, and so on. So we developed an effective system of doing that at scale. And now we're combining organizing with an accreditation scheme that will enable any organization in the country to accredit as a voter registration champion. Next slide, please, Jenny. So what do voter registration champions do? What's the scheme about? Well, it's about getting a badge. So it's a groundbreaking, non-partisan accreditation scheme that offers a voter registration champion badge to organizations that take simple steps to ensure their members can participate in democracy. So that's the first thing it's about. Secondly, it's about skilling up organizations. It's going to provide a one-stop shop to equip organizations to register people to vote, educate people about the new voter ID requirements, and encourage turnout on election day. And thirdly, it's going to be about making a difference. It's going to be about encouraging organizations to join a movement to make sure that the 300,000 or so at-risk voters are registered and equipped to cast their vote ahead of the next general election. The 300,000 figure, by the way, is the figure that we think through our networks we could verify are registered and become election ready. It's obviously not the limit of our ambitions, because as you saw from the earlier stats, there are millions of people who are affected this way, but you've got to start somewhere. What are the three things that all voter registration champions do? Well, firstly, they do voter registration, registering your people to vote. They do voter ID, educating your people about voter ID, and they're about voter turnout, encouraging your people to exercise their democratic rights. And depending on which type of organization you're from, these things might look a little bit different in terms of how you apply them, but essentially all voter registration champions will do all three of those particular things. I'm not going to go into detail on these, but just so you can see here, there is more detail on what does it mean to do each of the three areas. So what does it mean to register people? What does it mean to do voter ID actions? What does it mean to do voter turnout actions? And we'll come to the accreditation criteria in a moment. But just to say that the within this scheme, there will be lots of freedom for you to choose to hit the criteria in a way that is most relevant to you and your organization. So there isn't a kind of one size fits all, you must absolutely do this in this particular way. We will allow you, so long as you can verify that you're hitting the criteria, to work out the best way of running a voter registration campaign in your institution. And that is likely, I imagine, to look very different in, a local Catholic parish, Stephen, to a students' union. They're going to be different. And so we're not going to prescribe exactly how to do it. We'll provide training, we'll provide resources, we'll provide guidance, but we're not going to say you have to do it in exactly this way. What are the accreditation criteria? So it's important to say that this is accreditation criteria for a secondary school or college. So they will vary slightly for churches and faith organizations or student unions, but they are pretty similar. So what you need to do is to run an annual voter registration campaign that aims to register 100% of your organization's eligible students before the deadline with a 90% success rate. And that's really important. Up to now, quite often voter registration campaigns have been lovely, and desks in student unions and recruitment campaigns in the sixth form common room and all this sort of stuff are great, but they don't tend to touch the sides of the need. What we want people to do is to use their community organising training to think strategically about how you could get very large numbers of your of people in your organisations verified and registered to vote, rather than just raising awareness. Many organisations have been involved in raising awareness over the years, and we know it's not sufficient. It's good, but it's not sufficient. This is about having a much more ambitious focus on how to do that. The second criteria is that we require people to educate every student. In this case, if it was a church, we want you to educate every parishioner or every member of your organisation about the voter ID requirements, so that they all have to take photo ID with them in order to vote, and to make sure that they've got the required ID ahead of the deadline. So some people might not have a passport or a driving license or another form of official ID, but you can actually apply to your local authority for free to be issued with ID to enable you to do this. But we need to make sure people know that, and they've done that before the deadline. The voter turnout requirement is that you need to remind your students about the election date and encourage them to use their vote. We're obviously non-partisan, so we're not going to be asking people to say who to vote for, how to vote, but simply to do that. And then also we're going to be encouraging them to participate in voter registration week. Now this is coming up between March the 4th and March the 10th, and it's helping kind of build the movement by participating in a range of activities that are coordinated in that time. Because we suspect that the election will take place in the second half of the year, we're actually going to have 2 voter registration weeks in 2024. So soon we will announce one in the autumn as well, to catch that swell post the summer of people who might register then. Next slide, please, Jenny. Here's a case study from a school or a college. Again, there are case studies for different types of organisations. Again, it's not prescriptive about exactly how you have to do this. I'm going to skip over this in a minute because we're going to go into some detail around a school with Sandra later on in the course. If you can go to the next slide, please, but just so you can see there. There are also things you can do to go further. There is a kind of bronze, silver, gold aspect to this. The criteria I set out already is the bronze basic accreditation criteria. If you want to go further, you can. So it could be that actually your organisation, you want to help register not just the people inside your institution. You might want to be a resource to recruit other people in your local community who are not part of your organisation. Well, maybe then you might be able to go for the silver status. So there's an element here for organisations that want to go further. They can, and they'll get an extra badge. Next slide, please, Jenny. So what do you need to do to accredit as a voter registration champion? Well, you need to get organisational buy-in. So you need to make sure your organisation is willing to take an active role in registering your people to vote, to encourage democratic participation and fulfil the relevant accreditation criteria. You need to build a team. People involved in Citizens will know that this is not an individual pursuit, it's about building teams. So as well as getting that buy-in from the key decision makers, you'll need a named senior contact and a team of people who are willing to do the work, including at least one person who's willing to attend an online training that we'll provide. You need to work out a plan, so decide how your organisation will go about achieving each of the accreditation criteria, as well as how you'll gather the data to demonstrate that you've met the accreditation criteria. You need to submit your license application, which we'll run through in a second, which basically just gives us the information we need to accredit you. And then celebrate your achievement. You'll be able to use the Voter Registration Champion badge and logo. There'll be plaques and various other bits of merchandise that you'll be able to order to celebrate it if you want to do that. But also to be using your social media and communications channels to spread the good news. Next slide, please, Jen. What support will we provide? Well, a simple accreditation process based on the Living Wage Foundation's process. Comprehensive resources on the website, how-to guides, case studies, sector-specific guidance, and so on. There'll be regular communications that we'll send out. There'll be regular training that will be provided for free. We will give bespoke support for large organizations. So if your organization will impact more than 10,000 people, so if you're a university or something like that, then we can provide bespoke staff support to help you through it. We'll provide resources to celebrate your achievement, and we'll be organising Voter Registration Week as a moment when we can all pull together.